ازيكم يا شباب، اخباركم ايه؟ بسم الله كده نفتح شابتر 8 مع بعض. شابتر مهم وطويل. تعالوا كده نبدأ بالكلمات. جيت بوابة، كيز مفاتيح، ودايما الكيز بتاعت حرف الجر تو. patient صبور او مريض، طبعا قلنا a patient مريض. shadow خيال او ظل، exactly تماما او بالضبط. around حوالي او تقريبا. front door الباب الامامي. sword سيف. argument جدال. fight قتال او يقاتل. briefly باختصار شديد. strike يضرب. somehow بطريقة او باخرى. look through كان يتفحص. candle شمعة. step back يتراجع او يتقهقر. lock يغلق او lock يفتح. chained مسلسل او مقيد بسلاسل. fear خوف. break free يتحرر. tricks خدع. lie يرقد او يستلقي. moan يتأوه. he is moaning يعني بتأوه. احنا سيبنا رودولف ريزندل in the mood and all of a sudden he saw Rupert swimming through the moat and going to the summer house. ده المشهد اللي احنا وقفنا عنده في شابتر 7. تعالى بقى نشوف في شابتر 8 ايه اللي حصل. It was cold waiting in the water of the moat. وانا موجود في الماء حسيت ببرودة بقى. So when Rupert disappeared into the mansion, I slowly climbed out and waited by the drawbridge. خلي بالك المكان اللي هو اختاره. We waited by the drawbridge gate next to the castle. Now only Decherd, Persinnen and Degoute were left to protect the king in the prison أو in his prison. أصبح في 3 بس مع الملك. If only I had the keys to اتفقنا keys to the king's room, but I knew I had to be patient. It was a quiet night, and it was about 1 o'clock in the morning when there was a loud noise from the mansion. بدأت الضوضاء الساعة 1، ساعة كاملة قبل الميعاد اللي أنا كنت محدده. I looked up at one of the windows and saw a shadow walk across the light. A woman's voice cried, "Help Michael, help me." It was Antoinette de Maupin. This was exactly what I had asked her to say in my message to her. فجأة صرخت بنفس المحتوى اللي أنا كنت طالب إن هي تعمله أو اللي هي تقوله. But it was around an hour too early. المشكلة إن هي صرخت ساعة بدري. سبت وفريدز مش مستعدين لسه. Before my friends had reached the front door to the mansion, and before Johan had time to open it. لسه باب المنشن اتفتح ولا جوهان فتحه ولا سبت وفريدز جم أصلا. I pulled out my sword and stood ready for what might happen. Then I heard her calling again. "Help Michael, it's Rupert Hamzo." Rupert دخل عندها الغرفة وبدأ يضايقها. Called Antoinette. Michael must have heard Antoinette de Maupin call out, because I then heard him running to help her with his servants. There was now a loud argument. حصل جدال حاد. This woman has been writing secret letters to Reisender. الحجة اللي بيقولها روبارت إن الهانم كانت بتكتب جوابات لرودولف ريزندر. I heard Rupert call out. She needs to be punished. She's my guest. I heard Michael say, "It's you who needs to be punished." لو حد يتعاقب يبقى حضرتك. She's my guest. I heard Michael say, "It's you who needs to be punished." There was a shout and a noisy sword fight began in the room. بدأت المعركة. It was hard to see what was happening, but briefly I saw Rupert and Johan through the window. "That's for you, Johan," Rupert called, striking his sword at him. واضح طبعا ان روبارت كان عارف ان جوهان بيساعدني وحاول ان هو يقتله. I know you are Reisendel's spy. انا عارف كويس انت الجاسوس بتاع رودولف ريزندل. What had happened to Johan? What if he had been hurt? دلوقتي اصبح دماغي مشغولة اكتر كمان بجوهان. يا ترى لو جوهان اصيب ايه اللي هيحصل؟ في حد يفتح لنا الباب؟ محدش يفتح الباب، الدنيا تمشي ازاي؟ How could he open the door for our men? From the noises in the room, it seemed that Rupert was now fighting many men. الدوشة كانت شديدة جدا، واضح ان في عدد كبير من الرجال. Surely he would be caught. However, at the next moment, there was a loud cry. خلي بالنا من loud cry دي. And Rupert jumped out of the window. صرخة كبيرة جدا وبعدها هو نط من الشباك. and down into the moat below. ومنها على الموت على طول. where he swam away somehow he had escaped. بطريقة أو بأخرى هو هرب خلاص. خلي بالنا من الصرخة دي عشان نحتاجها بعد شوية. الصرخة دي كانت طالعة من مين؟ أيوة كانت طالعة من ديوك مايكل. هو طعن ديوك مايكل وبعدين jumped out of the window. طيب الدوشة اللي هتحصل دي هترتب عليها حاجة مهمة جدا. ايه الحاجة دي؟ الناس اللي في القلعة أكيد هتخرج تشوف ايه ده؟ is it an attack؟ يا ترى ده هجوم ولا ايه اللي هيحصل؟ وتعالى كده نشوف بقى السلسلة مشيت ازاي. At last I could enter the room. آسف. A minute later the Gautier appeared in front of me. So I struck him with my sword and he fell to the ground. زي ما توقعت حد خرج من القلعة وكان دي جوتيه. أنا كنت سايبه يمشي لغاية ما بقى قدامي. I stabbed him. ببساطة قدرت أقتله. And quickly I looked through his clothes for the keys. There were 3. لقيت كده المفاتيح، كان في 3 مفاتيح في جيبه زي ما احنا شايفين في المشهد ده. At last I could enter the room where the king was being kept prisoner. كده معايا المفاتيح، مع كده هقدر بسهولة أخش المكان اللي الملك مسجون فيه. Opening the first door, I found myself at the top of some steps, which led into a whole dark room. دخلت الأوضة الأولانية اللي هي without no window اللي كانت مخصصة للحراس. The only light came from a small candle in one corner. As I walked down the steps, I could just hear voices coming from the room where the king was kept, behind the second door. دلوقتي الأوضة التانية هي اللي فيها كل الناس، ودلوقتي في 2 حراس. خلاص أنا خلصت من ديجوتيه ففاضل بيرسونين ودي تشيرت. Carefully walking towards the door, I stepped back quickly when it was suddenly opened. فجأة الباب فتح. Now I could hear Dechert speaking. We mustn't kill him yet or there will be trouble. مش هقدر أقتل الملك إلا ما أتأكد إيه اللي بيحصل وإلا هيتسبب ده في مشاكل كتير. When a person appeared, I struck him with my sword. It was personal. أول ما ظهر حد طعنته وكان personal. مع كده ما عادش غير Dechert. Who fell heavily to the ground. Understanding there was danger. خلي بالك بنبدأ الجملة أحيانا باي إن جي أهو. Understanding because he understood. بتساوي because he understood. Dechert closed the door fast. Now surely he was alone in the room with the king. And remembering their plan, I knew that the king was in real danger. كده الملك أكيد في خطر. Taking one of the keys, I quickly unlocked the door to the second room and opened it nervously. I think I expected to see the king had already been killed. But once inside the room, I was relieved to see that Dechert was being held by the king's doctor. The king is weak from illness and chained in one corner, locked on in fear. The doctor was too weak to hold Dechert for long. And before I could help him, Dechert broke free and killed the poor doctor with his sword. طبعا وجود الدكتور المرة دي أنقذ حياة الملك. الله، يعني الدكتور قام بعمل مفيد قبل ما يموت. كده الدكتور كان عارف انه هيتقتل. When Dechert tried to kill the king, he caught him. حاول يعطل Dechert والنتيجة ان Dechert قتل. Dechert turned to me and said at last and في تربيت. أيوة. I shot him in his arm. I held up my sword and it was lucky that Dechert didn't have a gun. We began to fight. He was a much better swordsman than me. كان واضح ان هو اذكى مني بمراحل وفي استخدام السيف عنده مهارة اعلى مني بكتير. than me. And he knew all the tricks. He smiled when he cut me on the arm. كده رد لي جزء من الدين. عورني. أصابني. And I would soon have died if the king hadn't helped me. ولولا ان الملك بدأ يساعدني كنت اكيد هموت. My cousin Rudolph, he cried, as if he only now realized who I was. He reached forward and pushed the legs of the chair into Dechert's body. بدأ يضربه في جسمه. Push hard, I called push against the legs. وانا طلبت منه يضربه في رجله، أضعف جزء في الجسم عشان يضايقه. With the legs of the chair against him, Dechert found it hard to stand up. This made him angry, and he struck the king hard with his sword. But as he did so, he fell over the doctor's body. It was easy for me to kill him as he lay on the floor. يا جميلة جدا. وهو بيحاول يضرب الملك ديتشارد اتكعبل في جثة مين؟ الدكتور. وكان سهل طبعا على رودولف ريزيندا ان هو يقتله. Was the king dead too? I ran to where he lay. How happy I was when the king moaned. سمع كده بيتألم معنى كأنه على قيد الحياة. So I knew he was alive. But before I could help him, I heard a report somewhere outside the king's prison calling out, "Come on Michael, let's fight." واضح ان هو لسه عايز يكمل معركته مع ديوك مايكل. طبعا الاسئله كده نحلها وهنشوفها مع بعض. نروح لبارت 2 كده نشوف الاحداث كده ايه. تير تور يمزق. باندج ضمادة. فويسز اصوات. confident واثق. doubt off. run after retarded. wound جرح. wounded مجروح. run off يهرب. stage مرحلة. weave يلوح بيده. further أبعد. catch up with يلاحق. get off ينزل. follow يتتبع. check خد أو ودنه. double E. go after يلاحق. point at يشير إلى. ignore يتجاهل. rest راحة. lean on يتكئ على. respect يحترم. evil plans خطط شريرة. by chance بالصدفة. likely لحسن الحظ. somehow بطريقة أو بأخرى. reward يكافئ. hurt أو injured مجروح. meanwhile في هذه الأثناء. guard secret يصون السر. strange look نظرة خاطفة. poach عربة. approach يقترب. nonsense كلام فارغ. grass عشب. shoulder كتف. forgive يسامح. I tore a piece from my shirt to make a bandage for the cut on my arm. ضربت دراعي and quietly opening the prison door. I looked out. The drawbridge was now down once more. بصيت شوف ايه اللي بيحصل. لقيت كده الكوبري نزل مرة تانية. Report stood in the middle of the bridge with his sword, while the door to the mansion at the other end of the drawbridge was guarded by some very frightened looking servants. والناحية التانية مجموعة من الخدم كده يبدو عليهم الخوف الشديد. as well as جوهان. والحمد لله جوهان كان على قيد الحياة. who I was pleased to see was unhurt. Then Antoinette de Maupin angrily called out from behind the servants, "The Duke is dead. You have already killed him." ديوك مايكل اتقتل. انت already قتلته. فاكرين الصرخة؟ هو طعن ديوك مايكل ونط من الشباك، فما يعرفش ان الطعنة دي ادت الى وفاته. Dead called Rupert. That's good. Then I'm the leader now. Put down your weapons and do as I say. هتسيبوا بقى الأسلحة بتاعتكم وتسمعوا الكلام اللي أنا هقوله. زي ما احنا شايفين كده المشهد بالظبط. Instead of putting down their weapons, however, the servants allowed Antoinette de Maupin to walk onto the bridge. نركز في المشهد ده. And she was pointing the gun at Rupert. وبدل ما الخدامين يهاجموا لا ده وسعوا السكة كده ودخلت في وسط مدام أنطوانيت دي موبان بالبندقية بتاعتها أو المسدس بتاعها. But before she had time to shoot, if indeed she planned to. حلو أوي الجملة دي. ده لو كانت ناوية. ليه عنده شك فيها؟ لأن هي قالت قبل كده I don't like to see anyone being killed. فهي هو مش عاوز كده هتقتل ولا مش هتقتل. Rupert once again jumped quickly into the water below the bridge. Rupert ما ادالهاش فرصة كان نط في المية. More loud voices were heard and realized that Sept and his men must have finally arrived at the front door. سمعت أصوات كده يبدو إن هما الرجالة بتوعنا وصلوا. On the other side of the mansion, feeling confident that the king would be safe, I ran after Rupert and also jumped into the water. الرجالة وصلت مع كده هما اللي هيشوفوا بقى الملك أحواله إيه. أهتم أنا بقى بمشكلتي الكبيرة مع روبارت عايز أخد طارق. So I swam after him. نزلت أعوم وراه. I swam faster than I could with my wounded arm, and he quickly swam to where the rope was tied to the tree. وصل لغاية الحبل above the moat. He looked surprised but pleased to see the rope, and quickly climbed it up. I was perhaps a minute behind him, and once at the top of the rope I could see him running off into the forest. لما وصلت وطلعت باستخدام الحبل لقيته هو كمان متجه للغابة. At one stage I saw him look back at me. I thought I saw him waving as if it were a game. ولقيته كده بيشاور لي وعمال يقول لي كله تمام وكأنها كانت لعبة. أيوة، ما هو روبارت كان بينفذ الخطة بتاعته إنه هيقتل مين؟ هيقتل ديوك مايكل، فنتيجة كده هما يقتلوا الملك، يبقى كده نفذ الوعد بمين؟ رودولف ريزندي. As if he knew I would never catch him. وفاكر إن أنا بجري وراه تمثيل. We both ran further and further into the forest of Zenda until I heard another cry. What had Rupert done now? Soon I discovered that he had found a boy riding to the market. لقيت كده رايح السوق and had quickly pulled him from the horse and taken his place. عمل مشكلة تانية مع ولد خد منه الحصان بتاعه بالعافية. Rupert was trying to get the boy to be quiet by giving him some money, and this gave me time to catch up with him. الحادثة دي اللي خلتني الحق إن الولد مصمم إنه ما يسيبش الحصان. Stop, I shouted. He looked at me and smiled. What did you do at the castle? إيه اللي جابك النهاردة القلعة؟ he asked. I made sure that you are the last of the 6 men. كنت عايز أتأكد إن كله مات ما عدا أنت. I told him. Do you mean that you got inside the king's prison? إذا أنت دخلت السجن؟ He asked with surprise. Yes, I did. And what has happened to the king? He was hurt, but he's alive. I told him. Why didn't you follow my plan? إيه ده؟ مش احنا متفقين على خطة؟ أنت ليه ما مشيتش على الخطة اللي احنا اتفقنا عليها؟ He said. We could have worked well together. Get off your horse and fight like a man, I said. I ran at Rupert with my sword, but still on his horse. He easily pushed me away with his own sword. I ran at him again and managed to cut his cheek. قدرت أجرحه كده جرح كبير في الخد. But now he rode at me with his sword held high. I would surely have been killed, but at that moment there was a shout as Fritz arrived on another horse, carrying a gun. Rupert stopped and looked at us. He understood that he couldn't fight us both, so he turned the horse and rode away as fast as he could. Go after him, I asked Fritz. I said to Fritz. But Fritz was looking at me, not at Rupert. Sir, you don't look well, he said. And I suddenly felt very weak. فعلا حسيت بضعف شديد جدا. Fritz got off his horse and ran up to me as I fell to the ground. Is the king safe? I asked him weakly. Thanks to you, he is. فضلك الحمد لله الملك كويس. But you are injured. Here, let me help you. Next to us, the young boy looked on with wide eyes. Isn't that the king? الولد مش مصدق. مش ده الملك? He said, pointing at me. Fritz ignored him. After a long rest, I felt strong enough to walk back, leaning heavily on Fritz's arm. سندت على كتف Fritz. I later learned from Fritz and Antoinette de Maupin what happened at that night at the castle and the events leading up to it. عرفت منهم اللي حصل وإيه اللي أدى للكارثة اللي حصل في القلعة. A few months earlier, the Duke had met Antoinette de Maupin in Paris and had asked her to Brittany to see the coronation. She respected the Duke and was pleased to be his guest. However, some of the Duke's servants told her servant about the Duke's ambitions to be king. She didn't like his evil plans. هي اختلفت معايا مش حابة الخطة دي. And decided to warn me of everything he wanted to do. زي ما حصل حذرتني من اللي هو يعمله. When the Duke found out that she had warned me mysteriously, he tricked Antoinette de Maupin by inviting her and her servant to his castle. Once she was there, he made sure they couldn't leave in order to stop her telling anyone about his plan. Likely with Johann as our spy, Antoinette was still able to send us letters, and we could use her position in the castle to help us. Somehow, however, Rupert discovered that she was helping us, so he wanted to punish her. By chance, he chose the very night that we were attacking the castle. يعني روبرت كان عايز يعاقبها في نفس اليوم اللي احنا ندخل فيه القلعة. When Michael came to see what was happening, Rupert killed him in the fight that followed. Rupert, it seemed, believed that without the Duke, I really would stay as king and somehow reward him for his evil work. يبقى كان بيقتل مايكل طمعا في المكافأة اللي هديها له. He didn't understand that I was pretending to be king for the good of Ruritania. الحاجة اللي هو ما قدرش يتخيلها ان انا بعمل كل ده لمصلحة مين؟ برافو عليكم، مصلحة روريتانيا مش مصلحتي الشخصية. He believed I wanted to be king forever، ودي اللي كانت عاملة مشكلة. Because Johan was helping the Duke, he couldn't open the front door for Sept and his men at 2 o'clock, and it took a long time before they could finally enter the mansion. خد وقت طويل على ما دخلوا المنشن. This they did just as Rupert was escaping from Antoinette de Maupin. دخلوا في اللحظة اللي كان Rupert بيهرب فيه. Soon Sept found the king lying in his prison, hurt but still alive. He was carried with his face covered to the mansion. غطوا وش الملك وخدوه على المنشن. Where Antoinette helped to look after the poor king until another doctor could arrive. وساعدته برضه مدام أنطوانيت لغاية ما الدكتور يجي. Meanwhile, Fritz came to look for me, knowing that I must have run off into the forest after Rupert. Back to the castle, Colonel Sept had to ask Johan and Antoinette de Maupin to guard the secret about the real king. طلب منهم محدش يجيب سيرة الموضوع اللي حصل، محدش لازم يعرف إن الملك هو اللي مصاب. His men and the servant thought that the king had been injured while rescuing the prisoner. كل الناس عندها اعتقاد إن الملك أصيب وبينقذ السجين اللي موجود في القلعة. Who had gone after Rupert Hanzo. السجين ده طلع يجري ورا روبرت. News was sent to Turrenheim to tell the princess that the king was hurt but alive. وبعت قال لفلافيا تمام كله تمام بس الملك مصاب. And that she should wait at Turrenheim for him. The people of Steriso also heard that the brave king had fought with his brother because he had kept a prisoner in Zindi, was a friend of the king. والشعب سمع بالطبع المعركة اللي حصلت إن الملك كان بينقذ حد من أصحابه. The duke had tried to kill the king who was injured, but the evil duke had died. والناس عرفت إن الملك أصيب أثناء محاولة ديوك مايكل إن هو يقتله. However, Princess Flavia didn't want to wait at Turrenheim. المشكلة بقى إنها مش عايزة تستنى في Turrenheim, and asked Marshal Strakens to take her to Zenda at once so she could see the king. Her couch was approaching the castle as Fritz led me back from the forest. When we saw the couch, I quickly hid behind the tree. وصلت نفس اللحظة وصلت فيها القلعة أنا وفريدز. عشان كده استخبيت أنا وفريدز. But we didn't realize that the boy whose horse Rupert had taken had followed us. المشكلة بقى في الولد صاحب الحصان كان ماشي ورانا. He was very excited and called out, "Princess, the king is here behind this tree." We tried to keep the boy quiet, but it was too late. The prince's couch had stopped and I could see the marshal leaning out of the couch window to talk to the boy. "What you say is nonsense," called Strakens. "يا ابني كامل فاضي ده. The king is injured in the castle. No, really, he's here. He fought a man who took my horse." كان بيحارب شخص خد الحصان بتاعي. At this moment, Sept rode out of the castle to meet the party. سبت كان نازل عشان يستقبل الأمير. "This boy says the king is over there behind that tree," said Strakens to Sept with a strange look. "No, he's in the castle behind me." لا طبعا أكيد الملك فوق. Said Sept with a smile. "Please come and see if you don't believe me," said the boy. "يا جماعة ما بكذبش تعالوا بصوا بنفسكم." The smile disappeared from Sept's face and he looked worried before quickly saying, "I'll go." "Let me come too," said the princess. لا وأنا هاجي معاك. Sept thought for a moment, then said quietly, "Then come alone." لو حضرتك عايز تيجي تعالي وحدك. The princess was helped down from the couch. She then walked with Sept across the grass towards me. I sat down behind the tree, putting my hands over my face. Freeze put his hand on my shoulder. When Princess Flavia saw me, she ran up and cried, "It's you! Are you hurt?" I said nothing. So she looked at Sept and said, "What is this game you are playing?" يا جماعة مش فاهم ايه اللعبة اللي انتوا بتلعبوها مع بعض دي. This is not the king, said Sept quietly. جلالتك ده مش الملك. What do you mean it is not the king, said the princess. This is not the king, said Sept. ده مش الملك. He is the king, cried Flavia. لا هو الملك أكيد. It's his face. Rodolph, look at me. What's happening? Looking into her eyes, I said, "Forgive me, madame. I'm not the king." The princess looked surprised, then frightened, and I could see she didn't know what to say. "Come," Sept said quietly or gently to the princess. "It's the time you came into the castle. It's time تاخد وراه بس تسمبل ها. We have much to discuss." تعالي حضرتك معايا بقى القلعة كده ونتناقش في كل التفاصيل دي. نذاكر الجزء ده كويس قبل ما نخش على بارت 3. التو بارتس دول مهمين جدا ونحل الأسئلة بتاعتهم.